One of the reasons why I enjoy Zombicide Invader, aka Zombies in Space, is because as a sci-fi game, as a title in my board gaming collection, I don't have many of them. Now, yes, absolutely, the Zombicide formula of spawning lots of miniatures and collecting gear and making it to the exit, the narrative works for me. But if I also look at other sci-fi, space-based, futuristic type games exploring all the titles in my collection, I only have three. I've got Zia, I've got Blackstone Fortress, which I love, but I am a 40K enthusiast, and I also have Zombicide Invader. So in exploring this, I started to ask myself, and looking at some of the titles in my friends' board gaming collections, why aren't there more futuristic sci-fi type board games over fantasy type games? I mean, the default setting for many, many games seems to be sword and sorcery, fantasy, might and magic. Less modern games, although we do have like Zombicide Modern, and even less sci-fi. I think it has to do with kind of how the board game consciousness has developed over time. And agree or disagree in the comments, and certainly your opinion on it. This idea, and I know I'm compressing like 30 or 40 years of board game history into a few mere sentences, but I always experienced board games as doing this wargaming thing back in the day where you had the miniatures, you had the setup, you played for hours. And my first, I guess it is a board game, was Web and Starship. It was a hex-based sci-fi board game where you kind of built your empire. And it was really, really unique because you could play player versus player, but it also had an option for 3 players, which was great. Like that was like an amazing thing to be able to play 3 players. And what was great about it, also playing Ogre, was we could do this wargaming thing in a really compact, quick play scenario. Set it up, play it, and then put it away. So you had portability, you had approachability, and you had something that played very, very fast. Well, I think if we look at how war games developed into board games, the Holy Grail was always about capturing a role-playing experience, capturing an old school Dungeons and Dragons experience in a board game. So the DM doesn't have to spend forever prepping. You have a lot of options with what you can do, and you have that narrative. So I think it's just in the consciousness of board gamers where most of the stuff is kind of sci-fi, fantasy, playing sword and sorcery, things like that, as opposed to hardcore futuristic sci-fi with that aspect of it. It's interesting to see how it's developed. Now, in terms of my own collection, there is a slight bias there because I love dungeon crawlers. I love fantasy-based games. That's that Dungeons and Dragons role-playing aspect coming up. But also, I do look to acquire, and I'm always open to futuristic titles because that's something that I don't have a lot in my collection. That's something that we don't often play. And I think it allows for new and exciting opportunities to explore this board gaming thing as opposed to just another dungeon crawler. Although there's nothing wrong with just another dungeon crawler. So your opinion on that, in your own collection, just out of a curiosity, titles that you have, more fantasy, sword and sorcery, D&D, RPG-esque based versus kind of futuristic sci-fi, why not? Why don't we see more titles set in the far, far future as opposed to this kind of fantasy past?